Today I'm going to show you how I did this piece from my Garden Spirit series using graphite and water-soluble graphite. Hi, Shanna Rowe Jackson here from Caution Artists at Play, and today I am working with water-soluble graphite and regular graphite together. And what I am working on is my newest edition of part of my series called the Garden Spirit series. And basically it's all these imaginary women that live in the garden. And so I'm laying in a really simple bokeh background. Again, this is just from my imagination, so I'm just kind of going off what I know about drawing bokeh backgrounds previously. This is a background that is really simple and quick to do. Basically, you just kind of want some circles. I don't always just do like perfect circles. I do kind of more organic round shapes to kind of imply trees and things like that in the background. And I'm laying that in with one of my water-soluble pencils. This is a Derwent Graphitone pencil, and I believe I'm working with, I think it's a 2B at this point. I like to start with my lighter, harder pencil first, and then darken it later with the softer pencils if I need to, generally speaking. And that's whether I'm working with water-soluble graphite or regular graphite. I always start with the harder lead first and then layer it up with the darker leads later using lighter layers, because that helps to kind of make it so that it doesn't get so shiny, which is an issue that a lot of people have with graphite. Graphite is a lubricant, so eventually it will build up and be shiny, especially if you're just going ham on it initially and like just really driving it into the paper. So I'm using lighter layers, and it really doesn't take a whole lot when you're working with water-soluble graphite, because once you wet it down, it will become darker. So that's something to keep in mind. So I'm starting off light, I'm going in, and I'm just making these little organic shapes. Nothing too circular, nothing too perfect, because I want it to look kind of natural. And I went in and erased a little bit. It's much easier to erase water-soluble graphite before you actually wet it down. And then after you wet it down, instead of using an eraser, I recommend using either a Q-tip or a cotton swab or whatever to lift it. So just wet down a Q-tip and then lift it that way, and I find that erases much more easily than it does if you're using an actual eraser. And of course, it helps if you let it dry first so you don't damage the paper. So you'll see me come in at some point either with a wet rag or a Q-tip and lift out some of that darkness in some of the areas. So I went through, and like I said, I put a light layer down, then I'm just coming through with a paintbrush, and I think it's just a regular round. I don't know what brand paintbrush this is. It's like a generic Simply Simmons. It's not Simply Simmons, it's like a knockoff Simply Simmons that I bought from Amazon. So there I am with the Q-tip, lifting out some of those areas. And then I did try to do some lifting once it was completely dry with my eraser, and it helped a little bit, but I did find that the Q-tip worked better. So now what you're seeing me do here is I am actually using an Art Graph water-soluble pan. So it's water-soluble graphite, but it's in pan form. And I am using it just like regular watercolor. So I'm lifting it right from the pan with a wet brush, and then I'm laying it on that way. It kind of gives it a little bit more of a painterly look. So you're going to see me come through and use a lot of different techniques. Sometimes I come through with the pencil and then wet it. Sometimes I use the pan. Other times I will color the pencil onto something else, either a piece of paper or a palette, and then I will wet it that way. And I also use some Art Graph sticks, as you just saw. And that's the same company that makes the pan. And they just make these big chunky sticks, which are so chunky that I don't typically use them directly on the paper unless I'm trying to do a large background of really dark graphite. So I'm working on the irises now, and I just want to talk a little bit about this piece as it is and talk a little bit about the series. So the series is my Garden Spirit series, and they are imaginary women that I just make up, and they each are named after the flower, and they usually have at least one kind of creature, either butterflies or bumblebees or something else surrounding them. This one I put mostly just ladybugs in, and I think I put ladybugs in each of them. This is the 4th in the series, I believe, and they all have at least one ladybug, but this one has all ladybugs, and they're just kind of scattered throughout. And this one is called Iris, so she's going to be surrounded by irises. And so a little bit about my process when coming up with this series. Usually I either will make some thumbnail sketches and come up with the girl first and then decide on the flower, which is what I did here. But other times I will think of the flower first and then come up with the girl. So it really just goes back and forth. It's just a surrealistic series. I like to do realistic elements with my surrealism. And so these are going to be highly detailed flowers. And even though the proportions are going to be off because usually human beings are a lot larger than flowers, and these flowers are quite bigger than what they would be in real life, there's still going to be some realistic elements. So with this particular piece, I had done a series of thumbnail sketches. Actually, I had done a ton of thumbnail sketches and came up with multiple pictures from those thumbnail sketches. And with this one, I had done a small thumbnail sketch, and then I did a larger one to kind of get more detail with it, and then I did yet another larger one, and then I scanned it into the computer, and I took different references that I had of irises that I took in my yard, and I kind of overlapped them in GIMP, which is the photo editing program that I use, and just kind of decided how I wanted that layout of those flowers to be. And then I kind of perfected my outline on the computer with my tablet and printed it out, and then I transferred it to my paper. So there was a lot involved here, because even though I wanted it to be from imagination, and actually some of them I would just go in and straight draw like right on the paper. I think the first picture that I did from this series was done that way. There are times when there's more complicated, like when I have a plan for a more complicated composition where I need a lot more planning ahead of time, and you want to get that planning done beforehand so that you have less worry when you get on your actual project. At least that's how I feel. So I got most of that done before I transferred it to my good paper. There are some things that I ended up having to adjust when it came to her. Because she is from imagination, there were times when the proportions were a bit off, and as I was shading, I realized that. So I had taken some photos of myself just as a model for things like the ears and just to kind of see position of head and things like that, and worked from those. However, this girl is not based off of anybody specific. It's not a self-portrait. She is just a girl I made up out of my own mind. The flowers, as I said, I'm using references from photos that I took in my backyard. So I'm using a combination of imagination and reference photos so that I can come up with something that is semi-realistic and still imaginative. And that's basically how most of this series has gone. As I said, aside from I think the first one, although the first one was based off of lilies, and I feel like I did at least look at some photos that I had taken of lilies. So there is some combination of both here. And that's basically usually how I work when it comes to surrealism. When I do straight up illustration, I'm more apt to just sit there and sketch and draw it out and see how it goes. But when I want to do something that's more like realistic surrealism, then I'm going to be more likely to use reference photos. So I just wanted to tell you a bit about my process there, because a lot of people ask. I know sometimes when I see somebody do something that is realistic surrealism, I wonder, like, how do they do that? How do they come up with that composition? And really, it usually, on at least from my end, it takes a lot of work on the front end and, you know, planning and sketching ahead of time, either digitally or traditionally or both. Usually, mostly traditionally. It's just recently that I started using the computer to kind of help me out, and boy, is that a lifesaver. So, to talk a little bit more about these flowers, they are obviously highly detailed. I went in with my water-soluble graphite first and kind of got the shading in there very lightly, as I said, and then I'm coming back over it with my regular graphite for detail. This isn't necessary. I just feel better using my regular graphite for the details that I know that I don't want to move. Like if I have to come back over it with water-soluble graphite, I know that those details are still going to be there because they're regular graphite. However, you can absolutely do an entire piece just using water-soluble graphite. I just happen to like to use a combination of both. And you'll see me coming in even with my handy dandy Bic mechanical pencil, which is like one of the cheapest pencils out there, but I love them. And there's another one that I come in with, another mechanical pencil. I don't even know, maybe it's a Papermate one. I don't think so. I don't remember the brand of it. They're pretty much completely junk, but I keep them around because the lead, which really sucks for writing because it's so light, it works really well when I want really, really light. Like, it's almost like having like a 2H pencil, but even lighter than that and harder than that. I don't even know how to explain it. Generally speaking, I don't like the particular mechanical pencils. Again, I don't remember the brand of them. You might see me use it here at some point for lighter lines, but Bic is usually my go-to for mechanical pencils, and I use them in my regular artwork quite often, and I use them a lot to do my general outline, even for other mediums. So basically, I come in, I'll work on a part. Sometimes, for the most part, like when I'm doing these petals, I'm working in small areas. Just like regular watercolor, you want to try and make sure that you're not getting these certain areas running into one another. So you want to work on an area at a time, and while it's still wet, you just want to be mindful not to work next to it because it can run in together. It's not as bad as when you're working in color, because if a little bit of the gray runs into another patch of gray, it's not going to be as noticeable, but it's still something to keep in mind. And a lot of times when I'm blending it out, also just like regular watercolor or watercolor pencils, I am making sure that I'm blending light to dark. So just like any other time I'm starting light to dark, I do light layers and then darken it, but also when I'm blending, I go from the lighter area into the darker area, unless I am looking for a specific kind of like bleeding technique to purposely happen, because there are times when you will see me go from a dark area to a light area just so I can get a certain effect. I'm just going in and working on those stems now, those little details, and I'm trying to be mindful of direction of light. So that is something else that I had to think of ahead of time. Even though I am working from imagination, I want to pay attention to where my imaginary light source would be, because I want the light source to be hitting the flowers and the person from the same direction, so that way there it's more cohesive. So this light source is kind of coming from the top right hand side, which works out. I think initially my reference photo was actually I worked from multiple reference photos for these flowers, but they were kind of flipped, so I had to flip them around to make sure that the light source was going to be correct, and just kind of even base the girl's light source off of where the direction was coming for the flowers as well. So I'm just going in. These irises are so much fun to draw. Oh my. Like, I had so much fun doing these, but I became like so OCD about it, and I had to keep reminding myself, like, Shanna, this is a drawing. This is not a photograph. You're not even working 100% from photographs. Like, there's nothing to compare it to, because this is an imaginary situation that's not even happening. Like, you have to calm down. And I think we all have to give ourselves that kind of pep talk every once in a while. This was meant to be a fun, relaxing project. This whole series is meant to be fun and relaxing for me. I like the dreamy feeling of it. I like the imagination of it, and just the warm feeling I get when I look at these pictures. And so I tried to keep that in mind while I was doing this, because the flowers can be quite complicated. And the main thing that I had to remember when looking at these flowers was to look for the abstract shapes, because there's so much going on within those petals. There's so much going on within the highlights and the shadows that it can become almost overwhelming. And so I had to break it down into small areas and small shapes. And that is something that is good to keep in mind when you're doing anything realistic to begin with, is looking for those abstract shapes and those values. And that's what I did, because the petals are quite confusing in some of them. But overall, I'm pretty happy with how they came out. So as far as the girl goes, the skin tone, I'm actually coming through mostly with a blending stump that is already dirty from me working on the rest of the picture. And I am just using the graphite that's left over on that blending stump to kind of create a base layer for the skin tone. Because even though she's Caucasian, she still has skin color. Like, there's still going to be tone there. She's not going to be the white of the paper. The only thing that is going to be the white of the paper is going to be the highest highlights. And honestly, nothing is actually completely white on this paper when I'm done with it. Even though when I scan it, for some reason, it kind of looks that way. I had a very difficult time scanning it when I was done with this piece. But generally speaking, this paper is pretty much covered in graphite. I'm sorry, you could probably hear my dog. That's my dog dreaming. I don't know if you can hear it. I'm having to do my voiceover in the living room, and my dog is in the background taking a nap. But it's the warmest day of the year here so far, and we don't have our air conditioner in yet, and the living room is the coolest room in the house right now, so I have to do my voiceover out here. So you will probably hear my pets in the background. At times you'll hear the cat, I'm sure, because he's noisy, and right now my boxer is having a dream. I'm assuming he's chasing squirrels in his dreams. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but I kind of hope you can, because it's really kind of hilarious. Anyway, so back to the drawing. So the basic things to remember when working with graphite is your values. Like, that is the thing that you really want to remember the most. And you want to get that contrast in there. So I am using a range of pencils, everything from 2H to 8B, because I want to be able to have that value range. I like to have as many values in my drawings as possible. Because of that, I'm actually going to make her hair blonde. She's actually the first blonde out of the series. And it was quite interesting, honestly. I'm a brunette, so I have an easier time drawing brunettes, I guess. I haven't drawn a whole lot of blondes. And when I have, I've had a reference for it, which has made it a lot easier. So I left her hair blonde because I thought that it would kind of bring some of that contrast in there. And basically, the darkest parts of her will be in her eye area and, just the facial, in her facial features, especially since she's kind of facing away from the light a little bit. And so here I am laying in those mid-tones with that blending stump and kind of drawing out the facial structure a little bit. So the angle on this is a little bit funny because I switched camera views. I moved it so that it could be on a tripod so I could get a closer view of it, but also so I could get closer to the piece. So it's a little skewed. I swear her chin is not that big. But this was just so I could get a closer view. So for the eyes, the one thing that I want to remember, I wanted her to have light eyes, but I wanted there to be some dimension in there. Eyeballs are not going to look 100% white because they're set in, they're behind eyelids, so they're in shadow. They may appear white compared to other things, but they're still not going to be 100% white. So I made sure to put shadows on the eyeballs themselves. And of course, the irises, I wanted her to have light eyes, and they almost kind of glow here, which is a little bit creepy, but I kind of dig it. So I left her with quite light eyes. And her pupil is actually a heart shape, which is something that is kind of signature for this series for me. And then you're going to see me going back and forth a lot on this face because I wanted to get it right. And there were times when I had to, as I said, look at references of myself and just for facial position and things like that. And I will be reworking some of the structure. For the most part, I had it worked out with my thumbnail sketch, but then once, like I said, once I got into practice with shading, I realized a few things were off, but not so terribly off, thankfully. And I'm just going in and making sure I have that shading because I want the eyeball to look three-dimensional because it's going to be rounded out. And I want the cheeks, obviously, to round out. And I'm just trying to get those shadow shapes in there for that. Being very mindful of where my imaginary light source is. And for the most part on her, I didn't use the water-soluble graphite. I bring it back in her hair. I use just a little bit in some of the facial features, but for the most part, I went straight in with regular graphite because I just found it much more easy to control, and I wanted to have that control while I was working on those small details of her face. So you're seeing me use the Derwent graphic pencils here. And this video is not sponsored by any of the companies mentioned. These just happen to be the supplies that I have on hand. I'm going in and trying to deepen that shadow to get the three-dimensionality. And you'll see me go through with some erasers that look like pencils. I have a softer one that is pink and a harder one that is white. And for the softer one, that just kind of almost blends at the same time as erasing. And so I found that to be a smoother transition. And for really hard highlights, I went in with the harder eraser. And I will link everything in the description below. I also go through with a Tombow mono eraser at some points too for the finest details. Going in and looking at that ear, that is something that I always have to look at a reference for, just because ears are so funky. They're fun to draw, but I always look at a reference for that. And then I'm going in and doing the shadow side of her hair, really trying to give the illusion of light hair even in the shadow areas, which was kind of difficult. It was a fun challenge though. And I apologize because my studio lights kind of wash things out a little bit. My darks are actually a lot darker than what's showing here. And with hair, I am drawing clumps of hair. I'm not going to go through and draw every single individual strand of hair. I am thinking about the way hair would fall. I'm thinking about gravity and just the way it would tuck and things like that. And again, I kind of tucked my hair behind my ear at times and took some selfies and kind of looked at that to see. And I'm just looking for the structure of those clumps of hair. And that's what's going to bring the realism. We don't need any like spiky, crazy, stringy looking hair. We want to have smooth looking, soft looking hair. And then I go in and I soften it out a little bit. Because even though it's blonde, I don't need it to be completely white. It does end up being quite platinum looking, but I don't know, I like it. And I'm looking for those shadow areas. Kind of keeping them to a minimum, because I don't want it to get too dark, but they are there. They need to be there in order to bring out the structure of the hair. Alright, so here is the scan of the piece. Again, as I mentioned, I kind of had a hard time getting an accurate scan of it, but I'm really happy with how it came out. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Bye! Hey there, I hope that you liked this week's video. I just wanted to make a quick announcement. If you follow me on social media, then you probably know that I am doing a virtual studio sale right now, where each week I am highlighting an original piece a week that is available for sale. This is this week's painting. It is called Butterfly Kisses. It is an 8x10, and it's Pit pens on sanded paper. I actually have a video on this one. The frame is included. If you want more information, please check out the pinned post on my Facebook page. The link for my Facebook page is in the description below, and you can contact me that way if you are interested in purchasing this original. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like what you see, please hit subscribe. Also, if you're interested in seeing more of my artwork, I'm on social media, so check out the links in the description below.